Welcome to the first Data Science Hangout of 2023. Hope you all are having a great week. But if we haven't had a chance to meet yet, thanks for joining us. I'm Rachel. It's nice to meet you. This is an open space for the whole data science community to connect and chat about data science leadership, questions you're facing, and getting to learn about what's going on in the world of data across different industries. And so each week we feature a different data science leader as my co-host to help lead the discussion and answer any questions from you all. So together we're all dedicated to making this a welcoming environment for everybody. So I love when we can hear from everyone, no matter your level of experience or area of work. And if you've been here before, you've heard this spiel a lot, but there's always three ways you can ask questions, but also provide your perspective. So you can jump in by raising your hand here on Zoom. You could put questions into the Zoom chat, and feel free to just put a little star next to it if you wanted me to read it from the Zoom chat instead. Otherwise, I could call on you to introduce yourself and add some context. But we also have a Slido link where you can ask questions anonymously. And so I see Tyler and Hannah, thank you, both just shared that in the chat. But we share the recordings of each session up to the Posit YouTube, so you can always go back and find helpful resources and see an overview of each week. And we also have a LinkedIn group for the Hangout too, which I'll share in the chat here in just a second. One other note I wanted to add here in the beginning too is if anybody is hiring right now and wants to share that in the chat, feel free to put the link to the job descriptions there. I was going to share a link in a little bit later for Chase Carpenter, who is one of our featured leaders from the Chicago Cubs. They're hiring an assistant director of database marketing. But for our first Hangout of 2023, I am very excited to have Justin Elszasz here joining us. Justin is Chief Data Officer for the City of Baltimore. And Justin, I'd love to have you introduce yourself and probably fix where I messed up on pronouncing your last name and share a little bit about your role and maybe something you like to do in your free time too.
Sure, cool. Thanks for the invite, Rachel. Yeah, I know we originally planned on November, so I didn't intend, or I don't know if I deserve to be the first of the new year, but here we are. Yeah, so my name's Justin Elszasz. You pronounced it fine. Just pretend the Z's aren't there. So my role is Chief Data Officer for the City of Baltimore. I've been with the city for a little over 5 years now. I started off as the data scientist for our innovation team. So about 5 years ago, we were given a grant from Bloomberg Philanthropies to create one of their innovation teams. I think there's about 25 or 30 cities with these innovation team grants now. So from there, spent about, I want to say 2 years in that role. We then merged our innovation team with our with CityStat, our performance management team, and added a third program, our Data Fellows program, and I became the deputy director for what we call the Office of Performance and Innovation. Spent about 1.5 years in that role, and up until then, our chief data officer position had been in our IT agency, so Baltimore City Information Technology, reporting to our CIO. About 2 years ago, when we got a new administration, Mayor Brandon Scott came in. We also added a new position called the City Administrator, which is kind of like a chief operating officer for the city. The decision was made to move the chief data officer role out of our IT agency and to report to our city administrator. So it definitely kind of raised the profile of data within the administration, provided kind of executive leadership support around data and how to use it more strategically. And so when the role was moved over to the mayor's office, that's when I took the role. So yeah, coming up on 2 years in that role, that's just incredible. So over the last 2 years, part of the rationale for moving it into the mayor's office was to put a little bit more emphasis, obviously, on strategy and how to use data and analytics quite a bit more strategically than we had been, but also data governance. So we recognized, data quality continues to be an issue. There are constantly questions, and this is true of any city government or any jurisdiction really, around when you can and can't share data. What are the best uses? What uses should we not pursue of data? So data governance is also kind of one of those large buckets that I'm responsible for. So that's a little bit about me and the role here in city government. We just a few months ago announced we'd be using ARPA funding. So ARPA is American Rescue Plan Act. This is federal funding in response to COVID. Baltimore received about $640 million in ARPA funding, and we're using $2 million of that to create a digital services team. So that will be in my office. We've been recruiting. Our director of digital services, the city's first director of digital services, just started on Monday. Their name is Shelby Switzer. They came from the Beck Center and from US Digital Services. So really excited to have them on board. I posted a link in the chat. We are still hiring for a couple of roles, lead developer and lead UX designer in particular. So if you're interested or know folks, please reach out, apply. And I can also talk a little bit about maybe some anticipated new roles later this year that would be in my office. Fingers crossed. But we can get to that as it comes up. So yeah, that's kind of a quick intro. Happy to take questions or yeah, however y'all want to roll.
Yeah. Awesome. And what about something you like to do in your free time too?
Free time. I've got two kids. One is going to be 5 on Saturday, and the other one's 2.5, and he's just leaning really hard into that terrible 2 mode. Just really growing into it. So pandemic has been fun for raising kids, a lot of fun. Yeah, it's been a lot of stress. So that's mostly my free time. I read a lot, and I'm into road cycling quite a bit, but it's mostly the kids these days.
That's great. Well, happy birthday to them. While we're waiting for some questions to come in from everybody, it sounds like there's a lot of change across the organization and a lot of new data roles. And I was curious how you're going about building data literacy through city government.
Yeah, that's a great question. It has grown by leaps and bounds, even just in the 5 years since I've been here. There have become a few things that I've been kind of either pursuing but there's, and then more generally how it's kind of gone for the city. So similar to this group, Rachel, like one of the first things I did when I came into city government was kind of stealing from my previous job was, so I came into the mayor's office as a data scientist, but I didn't know who were all the data people in all the different agencies. So we called it the Data Center for Excellence, which was basically just a once a month, basically a hangout. Someone might present some of the work that they're involved in, or, maybe a new tool they're trying out, issues they're having. So that was one of the first communities of practice we kind of established around data and city government. And that was meant to, again, kind of connect the data people. There are a couple of things. So that was a few years ago. There have been a few other, like we have a women in data group now, kind of forming a community of practice and a safe space for women and minorities and the data. Most recently, though, it's been more of a concerted effort, especially as I've taken on the role of chief data officer. There are a couple of places. One is launching a data academy. So we have been piloting it maybe for the last 2 months with the Center for Government Excellence. This is another Bloomberg funded group, but they're at Johns Hopkins, literally right around the corner from me. So we've been developing a curriculum for the Data Academy. where we've chosen to focus is it'd be very easy to start creating some kind of curriculum that's for data analysts and data scientists, right? Like, here are the tools we use in city government. Here's like intermediate to advanced Power BI or whatever the case might be. But instead, where we chose to focus was on folks with little or no data literacy. So think about like your frontline workers, your solid waste collection crews, your housing inspector, like those folks. And so we've named a few different tracks within the academy that we're working on, but the first one that we've really given a lot of focus is this kind of foundations of data literacy, which is really just about, what are data? How does it show up in your life? How does it show up in your work? So trying to start at kind of, the very foundational level, so we can make sure we're bringing everyone along and growing data literacy. Another area and so we're actually right in the middle of trying to consolidate a lot of these disparate efforts around data literacy into a more comprehensive workforce strategy. Another component is around our job classifications. So in government, there's always, your functional job title might be data scientist, but for us, we still have actual classifications that are more like operations manager or operations officer. We are working with our IT department to modernize a lot of tech and data related classifications so that we can then work with our agencies so that they know better what they're actually looking for. I know it's similar in the industry where if the organization is relatively new to data scientists, they think they need a data scientist first. And so they hire a data scientist, but that person might quickly get burnt out because what they really end up doing is entirely data cleaning or creating a better data collection tool in the first place, which was kind of if I'm honest, that was what my role was like when I initially came in. So getting agencies to see that there's a whole like universe of data roles and trying to fit the best one to their needs. So that's another area where there's a lot of talk and a lot of work going into growing kind of data literacy within government.
Thank you. And I see a lot of chat going on back and forth and great resources being shared too. Catherine, I know you had a question earlier in the chat. Do you want to jump in?
Hey, I was just bringing up, you said you were working with some people at Johns Hopkins that at the last R Studio conference, that organization Data Trail that presented kind of focusing on many of the things that you were speaking to, different job classifications and things like that, not focused within government, but just that it is really kind of an industry-wide problem going from their focus for interns all the way up through any position. So I was just kind of sharing that with you. And I think somebody else included the link to the talk, that there's really a lot of opportunity there for partnership, but even, in your own neighborhood.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned them. So I haven't talked to Jeff in a while. So Jeff and I actually met, this would have been maybe 3 or so years ago. I don't think it had been called Data Trail at the time, but it was a similar, I think it might have been the same or a similar program. They were looking to train.
Yeah, I think they went through a rebrand.
Yeah. Training, really high school and college students from East Baltimore in data science. We actually did hire one on for an intern. I think it might have been an internship about 3 years ago. It's a great idea. In fact, I think the person we had hired had started in on college. They had started pursuing a degree in, I want to say it was music or recording, sound recording. Decided that wasn't for them, wasn't sure what was next, and found out about this program and said, yeah, this is actually something I'm really interested in. And so, they spent some time with us. And the really cool thing is he also created a small consulting firm. They were called Problem Forward. I think they're still around, but for those folks who go through that program but don't find an immediate role elsewhere, Problem Forward was spun up as a small consulting firm that would hire the people that they've trained in that program. And it was a consulting firm, so they would just take on small projects with local businesses. So it was a really cool model. Yeah, we've definitely worked with them in the past. I haven't recently, but yeah, it's a great reminder that yeah, some of, this is obviously a national and international community around data science, but there's even like hyper local networks of data science going on too.
Thank you. I'm seeing a few +1s to Alan's question from earlier. And Alan, I'd love to have you jump in next with your question.
Sure. Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody. I'm really curious, maybe Justin, if you could sort of blow up super high level and talk about like what's the mission of the office that you're in, and how does that relate to who your customers are? Are those residents of the city? Are they agencies and employees? What do the things you're doing look like, and how does that roll out to all of those people? Like, just to give context, and then Raha's got a great question digging more into detail about like real specific stuff, and I think like her, like I've got tons of questions about like doing data at a city level and what that's like. So
Sure.
Some of that high level context would be great. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe step back and give you a little bit like of the organizational structure. So like I said, I report directly to the city administrator, who is appointed by our mayor. So I'm in the mayor's cabinet. There's also, but because the role was just moved over less than 2 years ago, it didn't come with any other roles. So until we've now started hiring for the digital services team, I've been in office of one as the chief data officer. The office that I came from, the mayor's office of performance and innovation, like I mentioned, they have our performance management shop, CityStat. So they're looking at kind of broad KPIs, more as a way of either identifying issues or holding agencies accountable for performance. There's and then the Data Fellows program, which is another effort we made a couple of years ago. We created that program to hire in kind of entry-level data folks to get them in the door to city government and then deploy them to agencies that needed help. And then our innovation team. And then of course there's our IT agency, BSIT. There are, in any given agency, there are other, data analysts working with, who become kind of subject matter experts in their areas, their domains. My role, it's a little bit of both, right? And I'm hoping by the end of the year, it's going to be almost kind of like 50-50. So right now, me personally being responsible for things like data governance and capacity building, those are both things that are a little bit inward focused. However, with building the digital services team, that is about building better customer service and better digital experiences for residents. So that will have probably a resident. We're not like restricted to that, but chances are we'll be building things that matter, that improve services directly to residents. I mentioned 50-50 because by the end of the year, hopefully in this new budget year, we'll be creating a more proper data science team in my office. So, like I mentioned, our CityStat team, really wrestles with more high-level KPIs and performance at kind of a more, a higher level. I think they've always wanted to dive more deeply into data, but a lot of the performance stuff happens on certain cycles. So like police stat is a meeting that happens every 2 weeks. You can't like deliver deep insight or create new tools on a 2-week, cycle. Same with clean stat, which is about cleaning the city. So what I proposed is creating a small analytics shop under my office that, whereas our digital services team would be about improving resident-facing services, and this is part of this is just a way of making the case that it's cost effective, but the analytics shop, I'm imagining being more about efficiency and more internally focused. So helping agencies find, maybe it's detecting fraud, maybe it's optimizing routes for snowplows, that kind of thing. So we have that expertise in a few different spots, but because it's so sporadic, those folks are often pulled into just day-to-day operations or just the regular reporting, and we still don't, even though we would like to, we just don't have the capacity to set aside and say, take this problem and run with it for a month and come back to us and see what you've got. So that's what I'm looking to build, and hopefully we'll be hiring for 3 or 4 roles for that by the end of the year.
Cool.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Give me a good sense for kind of where you are. And I think that vision of what does a team look like that can do more and have like sort of room to run a little bit sounds really exciting. It's really cool.
Yeah. I'm excited too, because that's what, that's a little bit of what I had done previously. And so, and that's what I always imagined data analytics in the city looking like. And it definitely does in other places. So it's a little bit of, getting us up to speed. Now that said, like, there are going to be the opportunities to do that kind of thing are much more rare than, performance management or just simple data analysis, because again, it's finding the right combination of high enough data quality and an agency who their leadership and their operations will be able to kind of adapt and use that kind of analysis or tools, because leadership, it's on a spectrum. Not every agency, not all of their heads are ready to use kind of the next generation of tools to optimize our resources better. So they'll be, but that said, there are those use cases out there. And I've got a couple of examples I'm happy to share that we've worked on already, but that's what I'm looking forward to this year.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really interested in that snowplow optimization example. I see Libby.
Other cities, especially places like Rochester, a lot of northern cities have wrestled with that for sure. Baltimore is one of those cities where we get a dusting of snow and the whole city shuts down, because it happens so infrequently that we can't build up that amount of capacity to deal with it for the rare times we get lots of snow. But places like Rochester, where it's day in and day out for 6 months, they've definitely worked on those routes.
I see a few anonymous questions that came through, and I want to make sure I get to those too. And one was, what about hardware and cloud infrastructure? Do you have to deal with legacy systems? Does the new money allow you to upgrade?
Yeah, good question. Yes, about legacy systems. This year, our IT department. So I have a little bit. So chief data officer roles kind of run the spectrum in terms of responsibilities and where they're situated organizationally. I have a little bit less control over architecture. That said, yes, there are tons of legacy applications and infrastructure to deal with. This year, we're targeting finally decommissioning our mainframe, which right now still runs some of our environmental citations and some of our revenue collections and that kind of thing. So we're looking to replace that. There's also a legacy system with our housing department that was homegrown by one person that housing department had hired, who was there for 20 years, wasn't well documented. They of course left, and now we're kind of picking up the scraps on that system, and it does all of our code enforcement and a whole host of other housing department functions. So legacy systems continue to be a challenge. Luckily, we have an IT department that's kind of on it right now and has plans to mitigate a lot of that. And so as those things get replaced, we only have up to go in terms of data quality. We just, over the last 2 years, have rolled out Workday as our new ERP, enterprise resource planning system. that in and of itself, I think, has addressed a lot of finance and HR data quality issues. So yeah, we're making moves in that direction. Yes, there's legacy systems, but I challenge y'all to find a chief data officer in another city who doesn't reckon with that sometimes. And as far as cloud goes, yeah, so for one, our GIS team is working hard on moving a lot of our GIS layers and infrastructure over to cloud. Of course, it's with Esri, as is our Open Baltimore, our open data platform. I think it's picking your battles and where you're going to get the most bang for the buck at the moment for us. I'm looking to pilot a couple of tools to move to cloud. So one that I'll mention is we, over the summer, partnered with a group at Carnegie Mellon called the Data Science for Social Good. You may know this already, but Baltimore has like a lot of vacant buildings. And when a building sits vacant for long enough, rooftops tend to become an issue. And back in January of last year, we had 3 firefighters killed when a rooftop was a fully involved fire. The rooftop collapsed on the 3 firefighters and were killed. So we partnered with Carnegie Mellon to develop an AI tool that will detect collapsed roofs based on our aerial flyover imagery. Every year we get new flyover imagery, which means every year we'll want to refine and update the model and get new predictions so we can find any new buildings that might have rooftop issues. But we need better, like we can't run that on someone's local machine. So that's a good opportunity to start pushing the bounds of what we can do in cloud. So that's one of them. Yeah, we're looking for a couple of places to definitely move that way.
Thank you for that example. And I'm seeing quite a few questions come into the Zoom chat now too. And I think, Mike, you maybe asked first, so I'll hand it over to you first.
Hi there. So this is I guess a topical question for first session in January. It's goal setting season. So how do you balance, it's a newish team. So how do you balance goals about, setting up your shop and making, your infrastructure great and easy to work with, and the goals that are kind of, I guess, the kind of higher up, or your customers or your key stakeholders, the things they want? Because I'm right in the middle of that dilemma, and it's tricky, right?
Yeah, for sure. One is, I mean, if everything's a priority, nothing is a priority, but at least having enough of a mix that some things are for you, some things are for others. I'm kind of looking at some of my own, like I said, so up until now I've been an office of one. So it's in some ways these are like the office OKRs, in some ways they're like personal OKRs because I'm just one person, but yeah, I mean, so in terms of the digital services team and onboarding and getting that just stood up, like we're lucky enough that the mayor and city administrator needed to sign off on that spending because it's ARPA funding. And so, and not only that, but like, all aware of kind of one, hiring challenges right now in the market, but two, just hiring process in terms of city functions. And so so they rightly recognize that actually getting that team stood up, hiring people is a win. It may not like have built you, a new service for a resident or fixed anything yet, but that is a win. And I think we're lucky enough that our mayor like recognizes that. So we have kind of executive leadership that recognizes, that is willing to like kind of celebrate some of the smaller, more inward focused wins. And then, yeah, like there's a pretty, and honestly, for some of them, there is a pretty direct even though it sounds ostensibly about, internal capacity or being inward focused, there's a pretty direct line and theory of change from, if we improve data literacy by building this data academy program, we will improve service delivery to our residents. Or if we create this digital services team and even getting, a handful of new experts in civic technology, and we will build better services for residents. So now I'm lucky enough, again, being in kind of the public sector space where, it's, if you can't draw that line, chances are you aren't doing that thing in the first place, or you're not setting that goal in the first place, So I don't know if that helps or answers the question, but there was a couple initial thoughts on it, I guess.
Awesome. Raha, I see you had asked a question in the chat as well. Would you want to jump in next?
Hi, sure. Good timing. I just ran down to make sure my Amazon package wasn't stolen.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm glad that it wasn't.
No, I got there in time. No, so I live in Baltimore too, and there's definitely a lot of issues here that I'm concerned about that I feel data could really address. But part of that is making sure that you're able to collect the right data, that you're able to do analysis on it, and that someone listens to that and makes a decision based on it. So I wanted to see if you had any examples of where that has been done, or where you see it heading. Like, will 311 be better? Will street sweeping be better? Can you make sure that certain neighborhoods aren't underserved?
Yep. It's a great question. Maybe a couple of different scales I can offer. So one about, well, this would have been just before the pandemic, so I cannot believe it's been 3 years. We identified a pretty big backlog in DPW in terms of cleaning service requests in the city. This was upwards of, I want to say there were 15 or 17,000 service requests. That was a backlog. So these are things that had accumulated. It was right in the middle of the summer. So a couple of things happened. One was we worked with DPW basically to even identify that as an issue and start discussing how we were going to deal with it. And part of that was actually, we collected a few parameters from them, and this is more of an engineering approach as opposed to a data science approach. But we built a small kind of heuristic model where you could modify kind of the number of crews that were online, and some of the distribution of where the SRs were and that kind of thing, to try and estimate how quickly we could drive things down. And so you can manipulate how many crews you have where in the city, and you could see, whether we might or might not get to clearing out the backlog and when. Because I think we had set a particular goal of getting that eliminated by a certain date. I can't remember the exact timing. So one was that was a bit of a process of convincing that, you can ask for their parameters and plug it into your little model, but all they have to do is say, I don't know how this model works, or I don't believe your model, to not want to drive their decisions. They're not going to listen to it. So it was a very simplistic model that they could, you took them along in each step and say, okay, if you've got this many crews here, that means you could complete how many SRs, that day. The other half of that one was, they used to divide the city up into quadrants, and they had hard restrictions on how many crews they would put in each quadrant, which meant if a crew called off in a quadrant, it impacted that quadrant, but no one else. But the issue was, if all the SRs, if all the demand was in another part of the city or in that part of the city, you couldn't pull a crew from elsewhere that had a low workload into that area. So they were placing arbitrary constraints on their deployments. We got them basically to eliminate that way of working, that kind of strategy, because we proved out that you're exacerbating the issue by arbitrarily placing these constraints on your crews. So that was a really good win. And by the way, I think there was a Sun article at the time about it. The southeast quadrant of the city was getting far better service than the rest of the city. So there was a massive equity issue. So again, just by some simple analysis and showing them and bringing them along, we were able to convince them to make some better decisions. The most recent example of getting folks to make decisions was, so DPW is one of those where it's a little bit tougher they're a little bit further behind, I would say, on their growth curves in terms of data literacy and using data to make decisions. At the other end,
their leadership.
What's that?
They're also losing their leadership. The head of DPW resigned.
Yeah, just a couple of days. Yeah, it was like 2 days ago, right?
But do they even collect the right data in the first place? Is it available? Because I know when you were talking about the cleanup crews, I think they have 16 total, which is nowhere near enough. And so there's something that they need. You don't make hiring decisions, obviously. there's some gap of how they recruit and where they get people to do what. I mean, DPW, especially with solid waste. But across the board, are people collecting the right type of data that allows you to do the analysis to make decisions? Or do you then request them to collect that data? How do you do that?
In a lot of there's kind of the diminishing returns, right? Like, so 311 definitely covers a lot of our city services, and certainly for something like public works, 311 is meant to be the record of, the source of truth. And so, we direct residents to 311. That's what we look at internally to determine service levels. And now that said, we continue to have kind of quality issues around 311, like you raised, that, for example, there's still the concern that something gets closed, but the work wasn't performed. That issue, like, it's completely dependent on what SR type you're looking at, because there's 200 service request types, and each of them is an entirely different workflow. It's a different crew. It's different people involved. Anyways, all that to say, like, I would say on the whole, we're collecting the right data for some of the bigger areas. I think there are some smaller areas where we definitely need better data. One that comes to mind is it's related to illegal dumping, but our transfer stations, where a small hauler truck could go and drop off their loads. Maybe they're cleaning up debris from a construction site or something. So all they do is, they've got a pickup truck and they run a truckload of debris. We have really long line waits at those drop-off stations. And we've always hypothesized that because there are those long waits and these guys are just trying to make money, that if they see a long wait, they're going to leave and go dump their load somewhere they shouldn't be dumping it. And so that exacerbates illegal dumping issues. The problem is we don't have either a digital licensing or check-in process for the transfer stations. So we can't actually monitor, if you have a small hauler license, how often are you actually checking in at the transfer station? Because if we see that you have an active small hauler license, but you're never checking in to a transfer station, that might be a signal that they're taking their loads elsewhere. But because we don't have any kind of digital tools for doing that check-in process, we aren't able to look at that issue all that closely. So there are definitely pockets where we absolutely need better data. And again, it's always a matter of cities are resource strapped, picking, and like you said, there's a spectrum of kind of leadership in terms of being data driven. So it's finding those, like, where, finding the areas where you've got all of the right constraints satisfied to do some good. Sorry, I feel like that was a long answer.
No, that's great. It's really interesting to be able to, like, dive deep into one of these like data problems and see all the different sides of it. And that I know there are quite a few questions here, so I want to jump over to a few others. But Eric, I see you had asked a question in the chat a bit ago. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. It's been fascinating to hear your stories, Justin, and really exciting to hear these perspectives. So I'm just kind of curious, as somebody who really appreciates, the tool stack and how we're taking modern approaches to data science. What kind of modern tooling are you trying to implement across your workflows, especially in the government sector, where, of course, my collaboration mostly with colleagues at the FDA, and I know they tend to have some strict requirements on what they're allowed to use and whatnot. So just kind of curious how you're handling those approaches for like best practice of code development or releases within your team.
Yeah, it's a joint effort with our IT department because for the ransomware attack we had. So we had a ransomware attack here 3 years ago, and a lot of cities have experienced these over the last couple of years. It really ground city government completely to a halt. I couldn't access my email for more than a month. Coming out of that, there's been a pretty strong emphasis not only on cybersecurity, but even just modernizing and professionalizing our IT approach. And so our IT department has grown by leaps and bounds in that regard. It's a joint effort because this is one of those spaces where there's a little bit of overlap between IT and the technology side, but also data analytics and that side of things, and the data governance around it. So things like we're just now getting into like what exactly is our code repo policy. Internally, we have Azure, like the IT department is using Azure DevOps now for code and deploying, and so getting our data analysts onto that and getting them to recognize the value and bringing that into Azure is important, because of course on the data side and a lot of the civic technology side, you also want to build open source tools, and like that's always my preference as well. But a lot of folks who either come into data science from other areas, they aren't always up to speed on kind of software development best practices. And so you do get folks, writing code, maybe code that doesn't need to be or doesn't belong on GitHub and really does actually need to stay internally. So that's something we're actually kind of confronting right now is let's get together a policy where we all agree this is a great use case for open source. This is where you should make something open source. And here are the places where we can't make it open source and need to keep things internal. So there are definitely governance issues there. That's a kind of a live question for us. Yeah, did that answer your question? I can't recall.
No, that's quite interesting to me, and I can sympathize. In fact, I was on a meeting just before this where of my colleagues had never heard about GitHub in this upper part of the org, and yeah, there's lots of education that we even have to do in our own organizations about some of these tooling. But yeah, certainly it sounds like you're thinking a lot of the great ideas, and I agree. There definitely is a lot of overlap that can occur between what you're proposing from a development, tooling perspective and what IT is trying to serve up. So having that relationship solid up front is always really beneficial.
The other and the other really big aspect of it for city government or any government really is that we're an organization of organizations. So in some respects, yes, we have central IT who can support all of the other agencies. Up until the last couple of years, a lot of agencies pursued their own IT, whether they weren't getting good support from central IT or weren't moving quickly enough or want to try their own things or wanted to use something different than everyone else was using. So there's been a lot of there's been a federated approach, very distributed. And so, and that applied to the data folks as well. So there's an argument to be made that there are things we need to centralize and put more constraints around. The concern is always, well, we don't want to slow down an agency. If they've got someone who knows how to use data over there, we want them and the agency knows what they want to do with it. We don't want to be a bottleneck, and we don't want to constrain them. We want to get them to use that data how they need to. So there's kind of a balancing act there where, like, yes, we need to be a little bit more constrained and a little bit more centralized with some things, but not at the cost of innovation, agency responsiveness, real problem solving that needs to get done. So it is a challenge when it's not, in some respects, we're one organization, and in other respects, we're 30 organizations. So that definitely complicates it.
Rory, I see you shared an example of a citizen data science analysis in Baltimore. I'd love to hear from you and have you ask your question too.
Yeah, sure. Hey, Justin. I'm Rory. I live in Baltimore. I'm in Canton. A while ago, I don't know if you guys have come across this yet, but on Reddit, there's a thread of someone scraping the water bill page and taking a look at who has outstanding bills. And in general, the gist is that there's, I think it's like $330 million in water bills that haven't been paid. A lot of them actually being like often business or corporate customers. I was curious because right now I work in people analytics, and I'm working on building out a sort of active and passive listening strategy. And so this is what's top of mind for me right now is, how are you guys sort of collecting the needs of the city and deciding what projects the data team can get involved in and really help solve some of those issues? So I would assume, I've talked to a lot of people about this. They've seen this Reddit thread before, and I'm sure it's made its way through traditional channels to the government as far as working on the water bill. I'm sure you guys have some exposure to it. But what I'm curious about is if you guys are working on any kind of listening strategy to pull in from outside of traditional channels, ways of detecting problems that are going on in the city.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think every team, and I think every office or department or agency or whatever has slightly different ways of doing that. And for, once we actually have a essential like analytics team as opposed to city stat or some of the other data functions, I think like some of the criteria that of course come to mind are, having a project where you've got leadership buy-in, so that if you dive into the problem and come up with something, that they're actually going to be responsive to it and know how to
yeah, absolutely,
approach it. And as far as listening goes, there's, like I said, it depends on the area, but there are a few different conduits. There's, there's always going to be that issue that the mayor cares about. There's always going to be issues that the city council cares about.
Right.
You have the mayor's office of constituent services, who kind of deals directly with residents on things that are like maybe not just a straightforward 311 request, but are maybe more lengthier in-depth issues. Agencies all have their own community liaisons and PIOs that are out in the community and surfacing issues. For a data team, and how a data team might choose based on all of these different inputs and communication streams. Yeah, like I said, leadership, data quality is another one. Is this an issue? Is the problem at hand that we have data that might help us address the problem and we just need to put some brain power behind it? Or is it, well, when we actually dig into it, we don't have data at all, or we don't have the right data or good enough data. And so now what we actually need is to invest in a new platform or create a new 311 service request type, or put these people in contact with constituent services. I don't think there's any one cohesive strategy. Like community engagement is just messy. And by the way, like, I don't want to speak for the administration because that's not always my purview, but it's certainly like a huge aspect is, and I try to regularly do kind of listening tours with the agencies themselves. So whether it's talking to agency heads or deputy director of this bureau or even the data analysts themselves to surface issues.
Totally.
The problem is, the problem like there's no shortage of issues to address or even brain power or good ideas. A lot of it is there's just limited ability to execute. So the real battle is prioritizing and trying to keep focused on something for long enough.
Right. And I like discovering the problems. Probably it doesn't sound like it's a very big issue for you guys. You have the channels to get at what some of the problems are. Maybe a listening strategy that is built out from the central would help you see who's complaining about it the most, and that might help from prioritization perspective. But I mean, like we're still trying to figure that out even in private companies who have a little bit more control over how we spend our time sometimes. Yeah. So it's, I mean, I think it's a relatively new thing that people are trying to talk about and develop strategies around. I'm sure it'll take you guys some time to get there once you've determined it's a bigger need than it is right now.
Yeah,
well,
and
thank you for that answer.
Yeah, I also think that like at the 100,000 foot level, for Baltimore, like the priority areas, of course, are public safety and city cleanliness. And so the issue is that like solutions to both of those can be completely based on neighborhood, within the city. It's very hyper local, both of those issues. And so for issues like that, your qualitative information, the voice of the residents, is just as important, if not more important, to make sure you've got a sustainable solution to address those problems. The data that we have centrally to maybe analyze some of these situations may or may not tell us something at a very local level. We may have, so through one data, yeah, we can zoom in on a particular block. But for other issues, we may not have data at that scale, and so you've got to go listen to the residents.
I have one quick follow-up question, Rachel, if you don't mind.
We have quite a few questions. I just want to make sure I get to a few of those others too. Is that
maybe
if it's a quick one?
Format.
If it's a
I'll
quick one,
I'll ask just a quick yes or no format question.
Okay.
About qualitative data collection. I'm sort of like text analysis is also an interest of mine that I follow, and I was just curious if you guys are looking into that, if implementation of deep learning models is something that like is a big security conversation for you guys. You can answer it yes or no if you like, just to help move on.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I figured as much.
I can say more. And by the way, we haven't gotten into AI ethics, but AI ethics is something we're going to start working on here in the city as well. So
cool. I'll follow up with you on the side maybe to continue chatting more about Baltimore. And I don't know who the other person was from Baltimore, but maybe they'll want to loop in too.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
It was Raha in the chat too.
Raha, cool. Thank you.
Well, Justin, I forgot to ask you, do you have a hard stop at the top of the hour? Do you have a few minutes to go over? Or?
I don't even remember.
I love this conversation. I didn't want to cut things off.
I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have a hard stop. I'm good.
Okay. Timothy, I saw you had a great question on getting buy-in and leading to change. Would you want to jump in? If you're still
Hello, yeah.
There you are.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for hosting again, and it's a really interesting talk. I'm always trying to translate things that people bring into what we're doing at my research institute. And my question was sort of around what are some key lessons that you had, because you're trying to do, it sounds like a lot of change, a lot of scary change to a lot of people, and resources are limited pretty much everywhere, but specifically in the public sector, and I'm in academic research. So I was wondering, how do you, what are some key lessons as to how to navigate that sort of change leadership part of things?
Yeah. Oh my God. How long do we have?
You have 300 words.
Oh man. Yeah. One thing I've learned, and I think this was probably a mistake of mine early on in the CDO role was so when it comes to data governance, right? Like there's a variety of different issues you could be tackling. There's different approaches. What I had convinced myself of was the need for, let's stand up this broad data governance committee for the city. Every agency will have a representative. We're gonna take one issue area at a time, but every agency, every representative needs to make some progress on that area. So if it's data quality, we created this data quality guidebook or toolkit. And so step by step, the idea was that like month after month, every day JD, but make some kind of progress. Sorry, did I freeze? Are you guys hear me?
Yeah, a little bit, but
okay.
I thought it was on my end. I was just checking my Wi-Fi.
Okay. I think that was probably the wrong approach, especially in an environment of such limited bandwidth, not only from the agency side, but from my own bandwidth. I think I'm having a lot more success in doubling down on the areas where there is obvious buy-in and people want to change something. Trying to get everyone to move an inch in the same direction was a real grind, and I'm not convinced it has the same impact as finding the one or two people who want to go a couple of miles with you. So I think that's been one of my big lessons learned over the last 2 years. And maybe that's only when you're so resource constrained as to be an office of one, but yeah, I think that's one of my main lessons learned on that front. Of course, all of the other typical change management advice applies, right? Like listening and making sure you're actually solving someone else's problem and not just your problem or what you perceive as being the problem. But yeah, I don't know. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely want to leave time for more questions, but I think I'm seeing some repeating themes. One is like, it seems like feudalism is still alive and well, in the 21st century, and that's something to navigate. But also, the point that you raised, which is, if you don't necessarily have the authority to just tell people what to do, especially in other agencies, then I think it's good to find people who are already willing to go with you and then build your success stories and then say, hey, we did this and, this indicator went up for when, whatever the good direction was, it went, we saw massive improvement with this person who was, willing to go the extra mile or do a little bit of side project and then build that as a success story for others, I guess.
Yeah. Even when you are the person that has the authority to say, yeah, you have to do this. Look, I report to the city administrator, who is, like I said, is kind of like the chief operating officer. They early on were involved in setting some of the expectations around data governance, but agencies are under countless unfunded mandates, right? That like the mayor wants them to do this. These are the things they're legally obligated to do. They've got citizens wanting them to go in this direction, all of whom have a right to claim that like they have a voice in what that agency is doing. And I'm just one of those voices. So yeah, like I have, I report to the city administrator. I'm the chief data officer. That comes with some authority, but that still doesn't mean the thing is going to get done. And not only that, if I take the approach of, well, I'm in the mayor's office, so you have to listen to me, it's going to backfire and people aren't going to want to work with me. So that card is best kept for as long as possible in your back pocket, because it just burns bridges so quickly. So Yeah, the idea is really, no matter what, to find a way to ensure folks that what they're doing is in their best interest, genuinely, not just like selling them, on something.
Yeah, it's definitely tough, but yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Justin. And I know we're at the top of the hour and a bunch of people might have to drop to other meetings too, but I did want to just ask one more question. And I can't remember who asked it. It was maybe Sepp or Alan was asking about like cross-city collaboration between like different data teams. And if there's, I'm not remembering exactly the question, but if there's a way to connect with other city governments and work together. And I think I've seen this a lot in the pharma space recently, and all these like big pharma companies working together and creating packages. Curious if there's something that exists in government.
Yes, I often tell folks that's one of the best parts of working in government is we don't have to worry about protected information or competition. And so there are a few different networks, a couple that we participate. So like Bloomberg Philanthropies is pretty big in like the local government space. So Michael Bloomberg's kind of theory of change was that if you really want to make impact and impact people's lives, like local government is the place to be, because at the federal level, yeah, you've got very wide, broad impact, but it is very hard to see like, this $1 trillion budget trickle down to see how it impacts someone's lives. Local government is where that money eventually comes into your programs and projects. And so the Bloomberg network, there are a couple of different networks that they run. There's the innovation teams. They all, within the first couple of months of me joining the I team, we were visiting Los Angeles to meet with the other I teams, and specifically with Los Angeles's I team, because they were working on the same issue as we were going to be working on, which was police recruiting and hiring. They also run something called the City Data Alliance, which is a cohort right now of about 20 or 25 cities. We get technical assistance around a particular track. There's executive leadership training for using data. So that's another network. I'm part of it's called the Civic Analytics Network, which is a network of chief data officers from cities around the country. That's run out of Harvard Kennedy School by Professor Stephen Goldsmith. He was a mayor of Indianapolis. He was a deputy mayor of New York. So yeah, that's, like I said, that there's tons, and through that network, like I'll call up the chief data officer from Pittsburgh or Boston and like ask them if how they're tackling this problem or what piece of data stack they're using to solve different things. So that's one of the best parts of city government, is just being able to like cold call people from other sides of the country and figure out how they solve something.
Thank you so much, Justin. I try to capture some of those links and share them, but maybe after I can email you for some to share with the recording too.
Sure.
Because I saw a lot of people were sharing different open data portals in their cities too, which I can collect those all together as well.
Yeah.
I know you have a 2.5-year-old who's trying to take a nap pretty soon. So
no, that's the problem. He's not trying to take a nap.
Okay.
That's the problem. He's trying not to.
I might like to go take a nap right now, but
yeah, same.
Just want to check if anybody's on that had a question you wanted to ask that we didn't get to yet. I'll give it another opportunity to raise your hand here. I think a few people that had asked earlier had to drop, but let's see, double check. Oh, one hand. There it is. Hi, Barry.
Hi, everyone. Mine is not a question. This is my first time of joining.
Thanks for joining.
So, yes, I'm joining from Africa, the Gambia. So I am very, very much inspired by the speakers. So I look forward to joining next week. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you for joining. Yes, love to see you next week and have you join in the LinkedIn group too. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me too. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Justin, for sharing your insights and experience. Really, really appreciate it. This has been a great, lively discussion for the first one back of the year.
Cool. Thanks for the invite, Rachel. This is great. Thanks for all the questions, everybody.